welcome to Kickin with Sensei, and today we're joined by Stephen of West of Scotland Glima Academy. And if you just want to give the audience a little bit of background under yourself, Stephen.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me here. Pleasure to be here and to speak to you. I've been involved in martial arts for quite a long time now. I've actually lost count of the number of years, to be honest. I started out in judo when I was 8 years old, and then kept going with that for a good 4, 5, 6 years. And as things usually happen, you get friends that move into other things and stuff. So I started training more in traditional Shukokai karate, which I did for over 16 and a half, 17 years, I believe, reaching second dan Shukokai. And in the interim period in between all that, once I got a bit older, I started working things. And as you get a bit older and you've been competing for a good part of your younger adult life, I started looking for something a little bit more spiritual based and something a little bit more kind of grounded. So I discovered Aikido, which I've been doing for, God knows, about 29 years now, I think. I've been doing Aikido, I can't remember exactly, which unfortunately has become one of the most misaligned martial arts of modern time. But there we go. And all of that gave me a good background in martial arts. So when there was a call put out from a colleague and a friend of mine that I knew on our local pagan and Viking group that's on Facebook. And when I say local, I mean UK local. And he'd been in contact with a gentleman in Norway who was a Glima master, and it was about trying to reintroduce Glima into the UK once again as a traditional martial art. Yeah. So I immediately jumped on that because it took me right back to my old judo grappling days as a kid. So unfortunately, I don't have the body of the 8-year-old Stephen anymore, unfortunately. So we got together on that, and in 2019 there was a seminar held down in London, and we invited Master Tyr Nielsen and the Norwegian junior Glima champion Bjørn Bråten and Lars Egil Gulbrandsen over, all fantastic Glima instructors and experts in their own right, and they held a masterclass for 3 days. Excellent. In which we covered all the basics. And when we say basics, we are talking about the very basics that would allow us to start reintroducing this kind of lost martial art back into Europe, as it were, because it's not that widely practiced. So at the end of that, there were several very tired, very sore, but happy instructors, and the UK Glima Federation that Alex had formed has finally reached its kind of starting point with 10 clubs, 2 in Scotland and 8 south of the border down in England. And in fact, 7 in England and 1 in Wales. And that's kind of how it's all started. And then COVID hit and everything kind of ground to a halt a little. But we are still in contact on social media and through video conferencing and all that kind of thing, trying to keep the interest in the education going and to learn more about the art ourselves. Yeah. So that's effectively where I come from within the Glima environment, and it's a very interesting martial art, and one that not a lot of people know about, but they will be able to see it and its roots and heritage in other traditional arts, particularly in the UK, Ireland, this whole area. We all have a kind of a background in what we would determine to be what Glima is, which is essentially kind of forms of wrestling and, close combat. Yeah.
Could you go into more detail what exactly Glima involves?
Right. Predominantly at its core. Now, what we have to remember is you'll hear Glima referred to as Scandinavian wrestling, Icelandic wrestling, Norwegian wrestling, Viking combat, Viking wrestling. You'll hear it referred to all of these things. What we have to remember right at the start of this, Emmett, is that traditionally and historically, there was the only records that exist of the traditional combat methods were in the oral and verbal tradition. There was nothing written down, unlike a lot of other martial arts where everything got written down and codified, as it were. Yeah. So everything has to go back historically to look at the verbal and oral traditions. And we are very fortunate in that Tyr, who's teaching us, has himself been taught those traditions by people who've been party to the continuation of that But at its core, what we're looking at with Glima is a form of wrestling, very, very similar to the types of wrestling that we see in Scotland, Ireland, Cornwall, and also in other parts of the world. I mean, Japan has its own form of traditional wrestling. New Zealand has its own form of traditional wrestling. Russia has its own form of traditional wrestling. And wrestling is one of the, let's not forget Greco-Roman. Wrestling and wrestling combat for sport and for, defense purposes, and sometimes just for fun, is one of the oldest forms of exercise that we probably could record back in human history. I'm feeling cold, Emmett. It's -5 here in the back of Ireland. Let's have a wrestle and try and warm ourselves up. And that's kind of how everything like this starts. So that's effectively what Glima is. At its heart, sport Glima and traditional Glima is effectively, it's a form of wrestling.
Yeah, excellent. Now, there's no reason why you wouldn't see why the Irish and the Scottish took up Glima so much, like, so it's very cold in them parts as well. But
it is indeed. Plus, Friday night, Saturday night, we always disagree with our mates at some point, and I'm pretty sure some pub somewhere in Scotland or Ireland develops into a Glima brawl at some point. Do you know what I mean? A lot of pushing about.
A regular recurrence.
It's unavoidable, really.
That's it, yeah. And would there be any weapons involved in Glima?
No, this is where we have the separation between traditional Glima for combat and traditional Glima for sport. So they are literally split into sport Glima and combat Glima. Now, at its core, the Scandinavians, I'm trying to avoid using the term Viking as much as possible here, because Viking
planted up about along the back.
It's a huge background area. Let's just for anyone that's listening, the Vikings didn't refer to themselves as Vikings, because the Viking was a way of life. To go a Viking was to go and find your wealth and riches and trade and plunder and that type of thing. It was a way for you to go and try and better improve your situation back in the 800s to the 1200s. So
sorry about this, isn't it?
It's okay, no problem. So what happened then was that it was almost seen as a kind of temporary profession that you could pick up on, which is what that was. So everyone accommodates the Vikings with, for example, just a bunch of big, hairy, nasty people who went around in boats raiding half of the UK and, having some fun and taking a lot of folk away with them and doing stuff. Let's tone it down a bit in case the kids are listening. But at the end of the day, they were also responsible for a tremendous amount of trade throughout Europe. Europe wouldn't be the same without the presence of the Scandinavians in these Viking expeditions and the amount of trade, adventure, and, for want of a better word, exploration that they did. Yeah. So they helped carve out how modern Europe effectively looks and works today. And without them, it would have all happened at very different times and possibly have happened in very different ways. So in order for them to survive in those treacherous environments where you, in a ship with 20 guys, maybe 2 or 3 ships like that, you're going off to trade, and if you can't trade, you're going to raid, you'll find some riches, you'll bring them back. You had to be efficient in all forms of self-defense. You couldn't just turn up and say, give us your stuff, or we'll start a leaflet campaign and we'll make you feel really bad about your lives. It's the 9th century we're talking about here. Yeah. So the Vikings, I'll call them that now, had to be proficient in all sorts of weaponry, and they had to be proficient in all sorts of different weapons, because not every weapon is ideal for any given situation. The example of that is you don't bring a knife to a sword fight, you don't bring a sword to a gunfight. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. But what they would find themselves doing is trying to adapt and take on the different measures and weapons that they also would encounter themselves. So while you have the traditional Viking swords and Viking axes and shields and all this kind of thing that was used in Europe, they would also be very proficient in different types of knives, different forms of sword work, all this kind of thing. So to get back onto the question at large, which was about the weapons work in Glima has been quite extensively investigated and researched through ongoing things like the historical European martial arts groups and how people historically would have used these weapons. And that has been brought back into the combat side of Glima in the form that this is the type of weapons that the Vikings and the Scandinavians would have had to have encountered. Therefore, this is the type of weapons that we use. So when you're training in combat Glima, we use various types of knife work, sword work, axe, clubs, long stick, short stick, staffs, spears, use with shields and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's very different to some of the more traditional martial arts. Now, coming from a background in Japanese martial arts, I've also studied Iaido and I've done a tiny little bit of Kendo over the years. Yeah. And when you do those martial arts, you have your bokken or your shinai, your bamboo sword, and you're armored up facing someone else with a bokken or a shinai.
Yeah.
In Glima, we would quite happily give you a short knife and give the other guy, you can't see them, but they're here, a 7-foot spear. And let's see how you can work with this. Let's see you try and adapt what you've learned with the knife to shorten the distance, get in, close things down, and work against the spear. And that's not just to, it's not about being hard or learning how to destroy people on the street with knives and this kind of thing. Yeah. It's about learning the differences in distance, timing, when to move, when not to move, understanding how much of an equalizer that someone bringing a weapon to a genuine fight would actually represent. Now that nobody's walking about with a spear, but somebody could just as easily pick up an old rusty fence post or off a metal fence, and you don't want cut or stabbed with that. Do you know what I mean? And it just brings into perspective how different the situations arise when you're working with these different weapons. And also it allows us to study and work and develop how these historical weapons were used within the context of the art that we're doing. So we do have formal movements with the swords, the axes, the spears, the shields, and different attack and defense movements that we use in Glima, all coordinated to keep everyone safe just the same.
Yeah, that's it.
What's slightly different about Glima, particularly when they practice it in Norway, is they will also armor up almost to the full half arm and use live blades. So you're wearing full leather and metal protection on the hands, and the objective isn't to cut the body. The objective is to take the arms and the wrists and the hands.
Yeah.
Because when you are involved in that kind of situation, it's much easier to attack the vital areas on the hands and arms, and therefore render the arm with the weapon immobile, than it is to try and attack the body with it. It's in order to attack the body, you're also leaving yourself open to attack. And that's these little things that come across in Glima, as you'll see us in some photographs, particularly if you go onto the Academy of Viking Martial Arts site, you'll see guys like Tyr and Björn using, full hand protection, but you'll see that there's live blades against the wrist motions and all this type of movement. And it's there, and it's designed to teach you just how delicate that situation is. If you were out with your wife or your kids or whatever, and someone pulled a knife on you, you are going to get cut. Yeah. And it's hitting that home. It's breaking the myth of, I'll use it as an example of the greatest respect for the man as a martial artist, the Bruce Lee fight in, for example, Way the Dragon, where they all attack him one at a time. You know what I mean? Yeah. They basically run on his foot. The real world doesn't function that way. And Glima is very much an applied martial art. And it's applied methodologies. It's there for hitting home that these are serious situations. We can practice them in fun, and we can practice them in all seriousness, but we do have to be aware that, at the end of the day, we are not superhuman. We are not metal immune when it comes to these types of affairs. And anyone who's been in either the police or the military or anything like that will tell you the same. When things get that close, you are going to end up getting cut, and it's going to be very messy. And it just shows you how delicate and how dangerous those situations are. So it's not there necessarily to teach you how to deal with it. It's there to make you aware of just how bad this is going to be for you if you decide to pursue a certain type of action.
Definitely. And do you think the sort of rise in HEMA in the last few years has helped kind of carry Glima into the masses kind of thing? Do you think they've sort of supported each other to kind of
I think so.
popularise?
I think the two can go very nicely hand in hand. I've had an eye on the HEMA for a while, and there's a lot of really good stuff out there, and it's really fascinating to see these old martial styles that were practiced in Europe, because everyone attributes the martial arts with the Far East. They think, China, Japan, and don't get me wrong, these guys go back thousands and thousands of years. But then again, so does Europe. We've been fighting for years. In fact, so do the natives of America. They've had their own ways of fighting and fighting systems and things like that are completely lost to the world, basically. And it's a great shame to see these to see these things going and disappearing. But I think the rise of HEMA and the popularity rise in it, and I don't mean it's fashionable to like the use of historical European weapons, but it certainly seems to have picked up a lot of impetus, and HEMA's been a big part of that. And I think it's a great thing, and the rise of that does naturally fall into the Glima concept of things as well, because without all the work the guys are doing in HEMA, that wouldn't be there to help tie the two together, so that we can then look in all earnest at how we use weapons in Glima and how these things are going to work hand in hand.
Yeah, definitely right. It's actually HEMA that led me to Glima now, but
right.
it was actually my brother asked me about what type of fighting was used in Game of Thrones. So researching that, I came across HEMA.
Yeah.
We were currently watching Vikings on Netflix recently, and I thought, I wonder what type of fighting the Vikings used.
Right, cool.
Found yourself. So I suppose Netflix is playing a big part in popularising these things now, but
it's both a positive thing and a negative thing. I was teaching karate back in the late 80s, early 90s, and everyone wanted to come into my class and learn that crane kick from Karate Kid. They don't do it. There's no such thing. No, what do you mean there's no such thing? And then popularisation is great. And as long as people come into it with the correct expectations, that's the thing. Is the stuff goes on in Vikings and all these types of series and Game of Thrones. And I know people who've been training in martial arts for 20, 30 years couldn't pull off some of the moves that they're doing in those things.
Yeah.
There's a huge difference in TV fighting. Particularly, there's a couple of really good guys on things like YouTube who cut apart the scenes and say, right, well, let's take a look at this. Here's Jaime Lannister with a sword holding it in a certain position, and he's hit this man who's wearing padding, chainmail and plate, and he's hit him once and the guy's dropped to the ground. He's like, what was the point of all that armour? He may as well have just run. That wouldn't have happened in the real situation. The sword would have bounced off him and you'd have had two angry people staring at each other. And it's getting this perspective again of, what we see in television, what we see in movies, and what actually happens in reality. And it's it all kind of comes down to that conflict. And as martial artists, we are constantly facing that battle. I still get it all the time. It's, people look at the type of Aikido that I do, for example, and they say, I really want to do that. How long did that take you? Oh, probably about 30 years. I've only got a week. No, it doesn't work that way. It's and it's the same in Glima. How can I learn this really fast? Now, Glima is, and particularly Combat Glima does have aspects that you can learn very fast, which is one of the good things about it. And I used to tell people this in traditional karate and things like that, is give me an hour and I'll show you how to punch with an adequate amount of, knowledge and skill that you don't possibly break your fingers and you might actually do a bit of damage.
Yeah.
But if you're going to ask me how to do some of the more kind of expansive or advanced movements that you see in television, forget that. That's years until you learn how to balance. And Glima is very much the same. There are some aspects of Glima that we can immediately take and lift and apply in Combat Glima to immediate self-defense situations. And there's other aspects of it that require you to also do the wrestling part to understand the effectiveness and how it's going to work. And this is the same for all martial arts. It's no different. And I also include arts like boxing and everything in this. I'm talking about the whole gamut of combat arts that are used for defense or protection or sport, even. So it's there's a big difference between we still have to make sure that I had a guy come just before my class in the West of Scotland in Argyll opened, and there was a guy come in, and he was a massive fan of Vikings, and I'm desperately trying to talk him down from this guy's having visions of Odin before he walks through the door, and and I'm like, just bring it down a notch, please. We're going to do some wrestling. Here's a very simple move. But when do we throw axes? I was like, nowhere on my website do you see me throwing an axe. There's nowhere that mentions you're going to be throwing an axe at anyone. And I'm sure the police would love that if we all went out the back door onto the beach and started throwing axes. And it was like, and then they started, but Ragnar kills people by throwing axes in episode 1. And I'm like, bring it down a notch, please. Just calm down, So it's, there's this whole perspective versus reality thing that can be very difficult for all martial arts, it's always been that way. But within Glima, it's very grounded. So it's people either really like it or they just cannot take to it. It's maybe too physical. And I'm trying to remember who it was. I can't remember. It was a famous boxer, that it might have been Tyson, isn't it? Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face.
Yeah.
Something like that. And very much
Tyson.
I can't remember. Yeah, it could have been. It could have been Tyson Fury or something like that. I honestly don't know. I've just got the word Tyson in my head. But and that's very much how the martial arts always appeals to me. It's balancing this expectation between, for example, what we see in telly and what we see there. And don't get me wrong, you can see the wall behind me. These are the actual metal weapons. They're all blunt that we use for training with, that I use for training with. I've also got the PV weapons, polyvinyl weapons that I give to the students that they use for training with. And if I'm training with the students, it's only with PV weapons. So we can sometimes go a wee bit hard with those, but you are going to get a couple of bruises if you don't do what you're supposed to be doing, But it's been the same in all martial arts over the years. I've had so many broken fingers from doing weapons in Aikido. It's been ridiculous, simply because we're practicing planned movement and somebody decided to go early.
Yeah.
So there's always these wee risks there.
Yeah, nunchucks were always my favorite. People coming in wanted to be Bruce Lee within three classes. So I'd always give them the wooden nunchucks.
Yeah.
Within 3 minutes, they've hit themselves in the head, and all of a sudden they want to take it slow.
Yeah, that's it, exactly. Yeah, we used to. I used to train at a club that did a kind of mixed form of jutsu, and they used lots of different things. I only went in because it was a friend of mine that ran it, and it wasn't my thing. But he used to do lots of different weapons work, and that's what he always did. They wanted to try with the padded ones, but he would give them the proper chain ones with the really fast ones first, and then once they've whacked themselves in the face or the groin with it, he'd give them the padded ones, and they'd quite happily take them. It was always quite humorous.
It works.
It does, yes, yeah. I mean, I've damaged myself with homemade nunchucks watching Bruce Lee movies when I was 12. Do you know what I mean? And I swore not again.
I'd say you're not the only martial artist that's done that now.
And you're not a true martial artist if you haven't made your own nunchucks at some point. I smashed a window because I spun mine and the handle came flying off and broke a window in my neighbour's house. I get into so much trouble.
So my wife's banned me in the house from training with weapons. I've broke that many light bulbs for the bow staff.
That's just the risk, isn't it? That's the risk of marrying a martial artist. Do you know what I mean?
That's it. Now they should expect it from day one, but
I know.
And do you feel technology is playing a big part at the minute in promoting martial arts?
Oh yeah, definitely. Without it, it would be very difficult to do anything. There's a lot of people I know, and I've just started them myself. I'm doing Zoom weapons classes soon, mostly on the traditional Japanese stuff, but I'm also going to be running some Glima weapons classes. And I think without things like Zoom and some of the other technological aspects that we've got, it would be almost difficult during this COVID era, to even keep and hope to keep interest in classes going. And ultimately, even in the past, advertising, getting known, all this type of thing, it's been great. On the negative side of this, and with the greatest amount of respect to every martial artist in the world, there's some serious crap out there on the internet. And as I said earlier, I've been doing Aikido for a long time. I'm very passionate about it. I was brought up in an Aikido environment that was quite hardcore. It had to work. If it didn't work, because we were all from different martial arts. So if it didn't work, you'd suddenly find a guy from early doors, BJJ, putting a choke on you and throwing you at the floor and basically bumping your head off the ground, And when you look at some of the stuff that's out there now, it's terrible. It's really bad.
It really is now. But
it's awful. And unfortunately, the technology gives the bad martial arts the chance to be vocal and tar the rest of the martial arts. And this is the same in everything. I've seen bad karate, I've seen bad taekwondo, bad BJJ, some really bad BJJ online. It's terrible. But at the same time, I've seen some really great guys out there doing amazing stuff and some fantastic stuff. And not just putting out there what they do, but also the technology and modern technology has given them the capability to question what they do and allow others to question it and open up discussion between the martial arts, which I think is a very important thing. And in this more modern era, it's keeping the interest alive, I hope, for all martial arts. I mean, without, for example, things like YouTube, the interest in the traditional arts like HEMA, like yourself, you probably wouldn't have stumbled upon that 20 years ago because there was no internet.
that's it.
You would have had to go along and find some kind of local class, and then you'd have seen a flyer, most likely in a chip shop or a kebab shop, because that's where most of them were, and you would have had to have maybe driven 20 miles to find the class. And then you'd have had to have trained for a while to get into their confidence and for people to know you. And everything required much more commitment. And I'm harking back to the old days. I'm getting a wee bit emotional. Whereas now you can just click a button, tell me about what you do, tell me about what you do. No, that sounds crap. Move on to the next thing. So there's great positive things and negative things about emerging technology. It allows people more access to it. It allows you more visibility. And at the end of the day, it also allows people to make judgment calls based on the fact that they haven't actually experienced what it is you're doing. And this is the same for Glima. I've had people commenting on some of my videos online saying, this is crap, this doesn't exist, it's all fake, because the Vikings didn't write anything down. Now, at no point in any of my videos did I say that I learned this from a book. Do you know what I mean? This is hand-to-hand, this is direct communication training. You know, and that's what makes it so difficult to learn, is because there are only a handful of people who know this. And I'm very blessed and very grateful to guys like Alex who set up the United Kingdom Glima Federation and who were able to get in contact with Tyr Nielsen over in Norway, because Tyr has got a fantastic lineage of training and people. He's worked most of his adult life to unearth all this stuff and to make it available for us.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm sure now getting access to some of that information would be much easier with the advent of internet, modern technology, you know, video conferencing, all that kind of thing. But back in those days, people had to travel to make these contacts, to work with others, and it was a very different time. And we're not going back that far, really, when you think about it. Modern technology's not been there that long, so, and that's traditionally how things had to be learned. So I think modern technology and the emerging technology that we've seen in the past 10 to 15 years has made a tremendous amount of change and had a tremendous amount of impact on the martial arts community. It's made a lot of things more accessible. Unfortunately, it's also made the negative aspects more accessible.
Yeah.
And on an extreme scale, it's given a popularization to some of the things that are perhaps the most negative part of the martial arts. And I'm not going to go down that particular rabbit hole in great depth, but there are people out there who do not epitomize what the concept of traditional martial arts should be about. You know, self-development, personal standards, you know, helping others, encouraging positivity, you know, protecting the things you care about, particularly in the modern era. I keep saying area for some reason, particularly in the modern era where it's much easier and it's now quite fashionable to be like a big, well-known fighter in a circuit or a competition, and you know, to pursue those types of things. It's, people do need to be careful that they don't get dragged into the kind of the mythology behind why and how you want to be seen as being a famous fighter in the world, when really that's only a small part of what the martial arts itself, for me personally, is about. Yeah. Glima as well. Glima covers so many different things. It's not just about fighting. Fighting's a core part of it, but it's not the be-all and end-all. And it's the same as a lot of martial arts. There's a great deal of philosophy in Glima. There's a great deal of lifestyle. And personal choice aspects of Glima that can allow you to look at how you conduct your life and to make yourself a better person, a much more complete and rounded person as a result of that. And that's some of the things that we don't see often enough, I think, in modern martial arts now. I think that's starting to lack the respect for the old ways and the traditional ways of things being done. I think a lot of the respect for that gets lost nowadays. And that's been one of the kind of worst, for me personally, one of the worst byproducts of the emerging technology, is everything's there at the click of a button, you can get it, and I only want what I see. I'm not interested in the other stuff.
That's it, yeah. And do you think martial arts has changed over the last maybe 15 years?
Yeah, completely and utterly. The rise of MMA has completely changed martial arts. And that kind of tacks on to what I was talking about there, is it's popularized the art of fighting with not necessarily the aspect of what all martial arts training should be about. And I have the greatest amount of respect for anyone who chooses to pursue a professional or semi-professional MMA career. I know a lot of guys who are doing Glima who are both professional and semi-professional MMA fighters. And these guys are super fit, super talented, and very, very capable guys. So I'm not decrying that in any way, shape, or form. It's just that there seems to be a shift away from the preservation of what created the arts into just the effectiveness of the art itself.
Yeah.
And that's been a big change. And I've seen that happening in karate. I've seen it happening in Aikido, Jiu-Jitsu, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you name it. I get a lot of guys coming to me saying, I want to use this to enhance my skills and make me a better fighter, and then I'll throw them the curveball and say, well, what if Glima's not just about fighting? I'm not interested in that other stuff. I'm like, but I've not even told you what it is yet. You might find this really, really interesting. You might find that this is something that you've been looking for your entire life.
Yeah.
But if you go into it with only one eye open, you're not going to see the whole picture. You're only going to see what you want to see, and you're not going to embrace the whole culture behind it and the various other aspects of it. So it's the same for all martial arts. And I remember this back from my competition days. I used to enter karate competitions up and down the UK. And I won a few, lost a lot, almost all, but I won a few, and nothing major. Newcastle and Carlisle and Tyne-and-Wear and all that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, there were guys who only went in for the fighting, and there were guys who only went in for kata. And I would always try and go in for both.
Yeah.
I was better at one and less at the other. I'm not going to say what it was, but I was better at one and not so good at the other. And but that was part of the whole experience, was to try and do both and to balance yourself out. And I think that in the past 15 years, there's been a huge shift in balance. And as I say, I know guys that are great fighters, but if I ask them to tell me the background, the history and the depth and the knowledge and the creation of the art that they chose that they claim is their mainstay, they can't tell me much about it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a shame. We're losing touch with why these arts were formed and why we're doing it, rather than, and all for the focus of just how effective it is. What's the point of it? Yeah. And I see it all the time in various forums and various video comments. So many armchair masters out there, it's unbelievable. That stuff will get you killed in the streets. Says a guy probably sitting in an armchair somewhere, hasn't done martial arts properly for 15 years, goes maybe once every 3 months to a class when he can be bothered, or they can be bothered, sorry, let's not be sex specific about this, and then claims that that's going to get them killed in the streets when they live in one of the nicest parts of London and probably haven't been a real fight in their life.
Yeah.
The closest they got was a fight around the back of the bike sheds at the school when they were slapping each other about age 12. And then there's guys out there who you can tell they've genuinely had to face direct confrontation. Police officers, prison officers, military officers talk about it in a much more developed fashion.
Yeah.
But it's and again, that ties us back into the technology thing. It's so easy for people to just blast off at something and then sit back and forget about it.
That's it now. I've even noticed with health and safety regulations and stuff, even the training's changed a lot over my daughter now trains judo, and I remember training back 20 years ago, and we would have been outside doing it on concrete.
Yeah.
Gashi and Tayatashi.
Oh yeah.
And now they're using a maybe a 3 foot deep crash match for it.
That's right.
It's unbelievable now.
Yeah, it's everything has to be. The health and safety does play a big part. It's one of the things I do actually like about Glima is it's still holding on to that aspect of let's train outdoors in a genuine environment and not within the relative safety of the dojo. Now, if this were a kids class I was running, obviously I would not be doing that.
Yeah.
Unless it was on a beach and I could scour the beach and it was proper sand and we could mark an area out and I know there's nothing under the sand, I'd rake the sand, I'd sort it all out. You know, I'd get everybody to sign off in a form, I'd agree for the parents to be there to watch the entire proceeding. The amount of checks and controls you would have to have in place to do that would be unbelievable.
Yeah.
But modern health and safety, it's not getting in the way of martial arts, but martial arts by nature. I remember my first ever license book, and it had one disclaimer in it, and it was on page 1. And I remember I was really proud. I had my wee judo suit on, 8-year-old Stephen, even shorter and wider than I am now. I was not a small child, and I come running back home with this book, and I showed it to my mum, and she opened it and she went, first page, it just said, during martial arts, injuries can occur. That was the only disclaimer in the whole book. And she looked at it and went, do you know what that means? But that's how she approached it. She says, that means you can get hurt. Are you okay with that? And I went, yeah. And she went, okay, fine. Whereas now, if that appeared in a book, you'd probably get a 3-page letter back from a parent demanding to know what types of injuries and the situations that would occur under. Want to know how you're going to prevent these injuries from happening. Perhaps not all of them, you know, but yeah, the martial arts are about fighting and combat and defence and, traditional methods. And it's very difficult to do those within a modern environment. I've always got professional insurance. You know, I always carry my professional indemnity insurance. All my students are always insured. And I have the hall insurance that we always use to protect the environment, so that if for some reason someone falls and breaks a chair or rolls off the mat and knocks over a whole load of stuff and it smashes a window, we're covered to protect all. You know, all these protections and checks are in place. And I think that is vital given the type of environment that we work in nowadays. But as I say, one of the things I like about Glima is we also take the training outdoors. And that's very different because it's not in the sterile environment of the dojo. You don't have your shoes off, barefoot, although you can do. But you could be training on grass, training on snow, training on a beach, training on pebbles, which is great fun. Oh yeah, no, it's really quite. It's rather son the derriere, shall we say, when you get down on that one, and it just brings a different environment. And so we are still holding on to that kind of slightly more loose safety aspect, but everyone's got to be in agreement with it, you know. And what I always say to students is, if I ask you to do something and you're not comfortable with doing it, then tell me, because I'm not going to force someone to do something they're not comfortable with. You know, at the end of the day, I'm not going to force someone to do something. Although that's often where people learn to break their boundaries and to push themselves harder than they ever thought possible. I don't think you can do that nowadays. I think that type of power has been taken away from instructors, where, you know, it's a forward roll, just try it, you'll be fine. You know, if they say no and then you just do it, it's your fault. Do you know what I mean? And we do have to be very careful of the blame culture in martial arts as instructors, very much so.
Definitely. And finally, how can people find out more about Glima and about West Scotland, Glima Academy?
Well, they could go straight on to, we have a website there, which is the westscotlandglima.com. And they can also find us under West of Scotland Glima Academy on Facebook. If they want to go looking for us, we're also on Instagram. And, you know, if anyone wants to get in touch, there's also the United Kingdom Glima Federation. They can contact the chairperson there. And if there's anyone overseas, they can contact the Academy of Viking Martial Arts, which is based in Norway. And they can contact Master Tyr Nielsen direct. And there's various different styles and methodologies within Glima and different ways of training that will appeal to everyone. It's a fantastic sport. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of joy. The rules are very different to a lot of the BJJ and modern wrestling forms and judo forms that we get. the concept of Glima and how it works is completely different from anything that I'd experienced previously. So there's something there for everyone.
Excellent. Now, I'll put links to all that in the description as well. So
yeah,
it was great having you, Stephen. Thanks very much for your time and for all the information given on Glima.
Yeah, that'd be great. Let's say we didn't get into the guts of Glima, unfortunately, because I talk too much. But we
have to leave them, so I'm to go looking for.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to have us on. It's been an honour and a privilege to be here and speak to you.
No problem. Thanks very much now, and all the best.
Okay, take care. Cheers.
See you now.